All right, so who was the American general in charge of the Allied powers in the Pacific Theater? There you go. So we mentioned about this guy. Call him the Terminator. Why? What was that famous quote? What?
But I'll be back.
Can you say it like the Terminator says it?
No.
Why?
Because I can't talk.
You can't get your voice deep
Quiet
enough.
bell ring.
You can't get your voice deep
We're
enough.
doing a bell ring.
Okay, all right, okay.
Quiet bell ring.
Quiet Miller. Describe Japan's next target after capturing the Philippines in 1942. So why was this next target for the Japanese so significant? Okay. For both sides. I'll just put a comma here. Little break for both sides. So for the United States or Japan, why was this next target? I won't give it away. Why was it so? What was it so significant? What is it? Oh, seriously. Bless you. Never realized how fast Dean Bonner was. He rolls.
Yeah, he beats awesome.
That's not true. Better PR on both events.
Who are you?
Who's got the better at?
Probably around the same.
Is that a humble brag?
Like,
Oz, is that a humble brag? Yeah.
it was just a brag.
A humble one. All right, so who was this famous general here? The United States. Go ahead, Chris. Douglas MacArthur, you have the job. So he served in World War One, obviously World War II here, and he will also be in charge of the United States, the Allied forces, doing forces really in Korea after World War II. So we're in the Korean War. Okay, when you talk later down the road, when it comes to trying to prevent communism from spreading throughout Asia, right? He's going to be in charge of that theater. Yeah, it comes to a point though in that war where he'll actually have a conflict with Harry Truman, and he'll be relieved of his duties because he wants to try to push a little bit further, right? So you guys, we'll talk more about that later in your high school career, right? But for right now, we're going to focus on World War II, and with the Philippines here, with Japan taking over the Philippines, right? This brutal takeover, like we mentioned with the Bataan Death March, right? Their next aim, their next goal is to capture what? What is their next target? Connor. Australia, yep, good job. So with Australia here controlled, the Allied forces, power, military bases there in Australia. Once the territory of Great Britain, still is kind of this time. And after World War II, Australia will become its independent nation country. But if Australia falls, well, the Allied powers have any way of pushing back Japan to their own borders in Southeast Asia. No, it's going to be a lot more difficult to do. And when we talk about some of the defenses laid out in some of these even smaller islands like Okinawa and Iwo Jima, right? The Japanese are really brutal with their tactics and their defenses, and they'll just fight to the very, very end. There's a reason why there's not too many prisoners of war on the Japanese side when it comes to the takeover eventually, liberation of these islands as the United States moves to overtake these lands back. Because they fight to the very end. What was that code called again? Japanese fall. They're warriors code. That the Shido code. Yeah, good job. So we'll even mention towards the end of the war and how this was one of the main decisions to drop the atomic bombs on Japan. Right? Because the estimates, the deaths, the casualties, lives lost maybe after an invasion of the mainland of Japan would just be astronomical. It would be unbelievable, really, the numbers. They predicted about 7 to 8 million. 1 to 2 million American soldiers marching into mainland Japan, and about close to 8 million when it comes to the Japanese civilians. Again, fighting to the very death, never surrender, never to give up. So that's one of the reasons, okay, why the atomic bombs were dropped, which we'll mention more down the road. All right, so with Australia here, okay, this is really one of the last line of defenses for the United States, okay, and this is one of the pivot points too for the U.S. to gain momentum, gain traction here in Southeast Asia and Pacific. Okay, we will talk about the Battle of Midway. Coral Sea and Midway relate with one another when it comes to some of the destruction to some of these aircraft carriers and some of these battleships the Japanese face and even the United States face in this Battle of Coral Sea. But overall, okay, when they look at it, yeah, it might say, oh, you know what, this is more of a stalemate because this is this first battle out in the open water. But it's earned that the United States has won this battle because they deterred Japan's advance. They pushed them away, right, and finally stopped the Japanese out in the Pacific. All right, so we'll mention more about that here today. Here are terms. Before we get to the Battle of Coral Sea, though, there's an important event here that occurs, and it's really all about revenge. Oh, all about revenge. And we all know what that revenge was from Pearl Harbor. Okay. So with the Doolittle raids here, this was a mission, sole mission, to try to strike the Japanese mainland, okay, specifically their capital, Tokyo. All right, so there you go, the Doolittle raids and the Battle of Coral Sea. So make sure you note about the Doolittle raids here, why this was a planned strategy, planned event, why they wanted to do it. And then today we'll talk more about some of the mishaps here, some of maybe the confusion of it, and maybe some of the harsh realities of launching these bomber planes off an aircraft carrier. It's a lot easier said than done. There you go. All right, the Doolittle raids. What we got? What do we have for the Doolittle raids? Is that a hand? All right, why? Go ahead.
So they were bombing Tokyo in retaliation of Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, good job, right? So in 1942, right after Pearl Harbor, as the Philippines were unfortunately getting overtaken by the Japanese, the United States tried to send a mission out to try to strike the heart of Japan, which is Tokyo, the capital. And with that, yeah, it's not going to take out a lot of people. And when it came to it, it's not going to be much of a destructive power. But this is a way to send a message, try to show that the United States isn't just going to sit back and allow these attacks to occur. And just amazing the Philippines ongoing at the time the Doolittle raids occurred. It happened. Well, this was a way to just send a message. And for the Doolittle raids, okay, sent off by the USS Hornet. Okay, this was a smaller aircraft carrier of the United States where they had multiple bombers placed on the deck, which you can imagine these planes weren't really meant to take off of an aircraft carrier. So when you're looking at the aircraft carrier, the USS Hornet, and looking at these huge bombers that are placed on top of them, 16 B-25 bombers, well, it's going to be hard for them to take off, right? And at the time, these aircraft carriers are still new to warfare, still new to the battlefield, so to speak. And with this mission here, they wanted to try to get as close as they could to the mainland of Japan. A little easier said than done, though, right? Because we knew who controlled the Pacific at this time by 1942, the Japanese. So with that, the USS Hornet sailed as close as they could to Japan. They wanted to get in a striking range where they could launch these B-25 bombers off the USS Hornet and make this attack. The goal was to strike Tokyo, which they did, right? Which they did. And again, not much when it comes to destructive power, but this was sending a message to Japan that we weren't just going to sit back and allow for them to continue this aggression out in the Pacific. So as these fighters here took off from the Hornet, okay, we'll talk about the raging here soon enough. They attacked Tokyo, and the goal was to land in China, right? So with China being a part of the Allied powers here, sort of, right? During World War II, goal was to try to get there and try to seek a safe landing, which some of the pilots did, some of them unfortunately did not. All right, one thing to note though with the Doolittle raids, these B-25 bombers, again, they weren't adapted, they weren't equipped to take off from these aircraft carriers. And let's face it, if they're holding a lot of bombs, well, it's going to be pretty heavy, right? And it's going to take a lot of fuel to power these B-25 bombers these far distances to make this far travel. And let's face it, just get off the deck, right? At the time, they didn't really have a means of a catapult system, which we'll talk more about here soon enough, and what we have today comparable to what they had back then. They just had to fly them off the deck and hope and pray that they get up in the air, right? Which a lot of times, even still this day, it's tough to get these airplanes off the aircraft carrier. A lot of them do just crash in the water, which obviously there goes a lot of money, a lot of payload bombs just sinking down in the ocean. Right, one thing to note with Doolittle, he led the raid. He was the first one off the aircraft carrier. And, well, as he's taking off, you can imagine the first person taking off, well, there's a lot of planes that are sitting on the aircraft carrier. So you're limited to what runway you actually have. So as he's taking off the aircraft carrier, he dips down. The bottom of his plane hits the surface of the water. And then there you are waiting on the aircraft carrier because it obviously goes down a little bit. You know, make it. All of a sudden they see the plane fly out. Like, all right, let's go. Let's go on this mission, right? But anyway, with the Hornet, their goal is to try to get in within 400 miles of the mainland of Japan. But that didn't happen. There was a patrol ship that was out, and, well, as they're getting close to mainland of Japan, they had to actually send off a little bit earlier than expected. So again, with limited amount of fuel, well, a lot of these pilots and these aircrew members figured that they weren't going to return home because they just didn't have enough fuel to make this trip to bomb Tokyo and then eventually get into China, right? So with that, this was a successful mission when it comes to its point, right? When it comes to its objective. And striking Tokyo was, again, an act of revenge. Did it really create a lot of chaos or, let's say, a powerful attack? Not really, but it just was more to send a message. Okay, again, imagine the United States strike to Washington, D.C., the capital. Right? It would be devastating. Right? It would be a huge blow to morale. But for the United States, right after Pearl Harbor, we needed something, especially losing the Philippines to the Japanese. Well, we just needed some sort of motivation, some sort of motivating factor to keep us moving in this war and build momentum, build some sort of positive movement here in this war. All right, so with the Doolittle raids, okay, there were 3 members that were killed. Right, when it came to the attack alone, they were shot down, and there were 3 other members that landed in China, but it was Japanese controlled part of China. So these men were captured by the Japanese, and well, they learned after that. They were killed. They were brutally tortured and killed for these acts. Right, so many of the other crew members survived, like James Doolittle. He did survive. He landed in China, where he was safely escorted back to the United States eventually. So with this mission, again, not causing a lot of power, not causing a lot of destruction, but again, sending a message. All right, so with that, okay, you can kind of see the momentum shifting a little bit already. Right now, well, after the Philippines falling the Japanese, well, now we needed to make sure we could stop them from taking Australia. And with the Battle of Coral Sea, this was what this battle is all about. Right? It was actually one of the first battles where you see aircraft carrier versus aircraft carrier. Okay, it wasn't like these traditional naval battles where you have battleships just shooting at one another. Okay, that didn't actually happen at all. Right? It was just an aircraft carrier versus aircraft carrier, these dogfights that are happening above the skies, above the waters with these airplanes, which the United States did a very good job of deterring and pushing away the Japanese advancement. Right? Again, if the Japanese would have won this battle, they probably would have took Australia. It would have been a lot longer of a war. They would have estimated this war would have carried over to the 1950s if the Japanese took Australia, because they would have hunkered down, with the Shido Code, fences that they would have had in Australia. And for us, there's no other striking distance, there's no other striking plan, right, for us to maybe push Japan back to their borders. So this was a very important battle for us. Also, right, when you just look at it on warfare, let's just put the sides, obviously Japan and the United States to the side. This is changing warfare forever. Okay, now when it comes to Navy, there's the Navy and a lot of these militaries moving forward, they're putting a lot of emphasis in building aircraft carriers. Warfare is totally changing, right? So when it comes to these naval battles, it's not like they're just duking it out with these battleships, these destroyers. You guys remember talking about dreadnoughts? Yeah, U-boats. Well, now it's more for aircraft carriers. And the idea is power projection. Okay, so how far you can actually attack your enemy from further distances. So with these jet planes, these fighter planes today, right, how far you can actually target your enemy is more of an asset than, let's just say, having these hundreds and hundreds of battleships, which you can see today when it comes to our military. And so we have about 13 aircraft carriers, nuclear powered, which is way more advanced than many of the other countries even combined. Like China has about 2, which none of them are nuclear powered. So that helps when it comes to refueling, right? At our nuclear powered aircraft carriers, well, we can go out for 25 years without having to stop to refuel, so to speak. Obviously, with nuclear power, you just plug the cords of the nuclear power, different types of coils, and you replace it after 25 years. So that's something to note. And also, when it comes to sending these aircraft, or these these planes off the aircraft carriers, at the time they had some sort of steam powered, right, catapult system to launch these planes off. This time you're just kind of rolling off and hoping, praying that you're getting up in the air. Right, later during the Korean War, eventually when we get further into the Cold War, they actually launched these planes off by steam-powered catapult system. So launching the plane literally right off the aircraft. Again, causes a lot of issues sometimes. What happens if the catapult snaps? Well, that's a big issue, big problem, and you're out of commission launching the planes off. Now they actually have a magnetic field that launches these jet planes off, which is still a work in progress. Okay, so some of these jet planes now today are launched off by a magnetic field, which is very sophisticated. And we are the only country that has that technology to continually launch these planes off the aircraft carrier. So that's something interesting, right? And how it kind of really transpired over time. But with the Battle of Coral Sea, okay, the Japanese lost over 1,000 men, okay, and a massive number of their airplanes. Okay, so this was a huge, brutal loss for Japan when it comes to their battleships that were targeted by airplanes in the United States and their aircraft carriers. So much so that they were that weakened from the Battle of Coral Sea that they couldn't really do too much when it came to the Battle of Midway, which we'll talk more about how we actually lured Japan into attack Midway Islands and pretty much taken out their whole fleet within one battle, within a matter of literally minutes, which we'll mention here soon enough. And when it comes to intel and this new wave of warfare and trying to literally bait your enemy into targeting the Midway Islands here, like we talked, and we'll mention here more about, this is going to be a huge success for the U.S. Right, the U.S. did take some lumps. The Yorktown, which is one of our aircraft carriers, was battered and beaten down, but Yorktown will fight then in Midway, the Battle of Midway, and will be a huge success for the U.S. and a turning point for the United States. So when you think about the turning point of the Pacific Theater, they always say the Battle of Midway. Yes, it is. But a lot of people skip over the Battle of Coral Sea. And without the Battle of Coral Sea here, Australia would have fell. And at the same time, right, this was a way for us to really see a lot of damage to the Japanese aircraft and Navy, allowing us to win at the Battle of Midway. Each and every year, Australia has a huge event celebrating this battle. Again, because if the United States would have lost, all chances are Australia would have fell to the Japanese, and that country would have looked a lot different. Right? Looked a lot different. A lot of the fighting would have been pretty much revolved there around Australia. All right, so is there any questions here? The Doolittle raids. Again, more of an act of revenge, but a successful mission. Right? Unfortunately, yeah, we lost some men there, but okay, you can just see and understand about the heroic duties of James Doolittle and his air crew targeting Tokyo, sending a message. All right, and this will lead, which we'll mention more, about more strikes on Tokyo. And their infrastructure, their buildings were all made out of primarily wood, right? So in New York City, these bigger cities in the US, more steel. So these fire raids in Tokyo that will ensue throughout the rest of World War II is going to be so damaging that it actually killed, unfortunately, more casualties and more civilians than the atomic bombs themselves. So these fire bombings that continued year in, year out, well, day in, day out, week in, week out, throughout the course of the war, it's going to be so brutal that it just destroys all of the city, lays it to waste. And unfortunately, you only hear about civilians dying in warfare, but kills more people than the atomic bombs. So this is just a continuation of the constant targeting of many cities and many areas all throughout Japan, showing that we can target them, we can strike them at any point. All right, so any questions here about Coral Sea, the Doolittle raids? All right, so I just have a video to finish off about the Doolittle raids. I did